Chromatic harmony in theory and practice. Which of the different chords should we give specific names to? On what basis? Are they the most used, the most interesting, the most remote? What are we to make of the fact that different languages and national traditions have different approaches to this question? What could we learn from the differences between English-speaking and German-speaking traditions, for example? And how might corpora and computational methods help us to assess these questions through usage in practice? Consider the augmented sixth chord, for example. We can find sources introducing these chords that go back at least 200 years. And in at least English language textbooks, the typical pattern has been to introduce the so-called Italian sixth first, the 6/3, before introducing the French and the German. And that pattern is broadly typical of English language textbooks even today. There are three types of augmented sixth chord: the 6/3, the 6/5/3, and the 6/4/3. This contrasts with the typical approach in German-speaking textbooks where there is one term, the übermäßiger Quintsechstakkord, which happens to be the version that would correspond to the English language notion of a German sixth. There is also the question of how these chords should be used. What is a typical usage of these chords? This example from Louise Reichart is broadly considered to be a typical usage of the Italian sixth. But we can all point to examples which are rather different, as in this Harry Thacker Burley song, for example, which has a passage that could be described in terms of either parallel French sixths or else a tritone substitute cycle of fifths. What might a data-driven approach do for us here? Presumably it could demonstrate that typical usages are more common than atypical ones. Might it also shed some light on those German versus English language approaches to the categorization question? Well, to answer questions of that kind, we need to make our own data, because these sources don't come with harmonic analyses. The data reported here and in the paper comes from the When in Rome metacorpus, for which there is also a public-facing anthology as part of the Open Music Theory textbook. QR codes for both are shown on your screen now. In the case of augmented sixth chords, the leader corpus shows a much greater use of these chords in minor key than in major key, and a much greater use of the German sixth than the other kinds. The paper discusses this case of the augmented sixth chord in terms of other subcorpora of When in Rome, alongside other chord categories such as the Neapolitan sixth and particularly modal mixture, for which I propose a new flexible modular definition. There's also some discussion of chord progressions. For example, in the case of the cycle of fifths, I demonstrate that the descending cycle is very much more common than the ascending cycle. And the same is true of the aufsteigender Quintfall and fallender Quintanstieg pair. Thanks very much for watching this video.